Last week, the tennis world showed us why sometimes the most compelling stories come from unexpected places. A Davis Cup match that turned into UFC, ball boys stealing the show, and players finding redemption after tough Australian Open losses. Speaking of the Australian Open, after dropping videos on Novak, Lerner Tien, and the weekly recap in the last week alone, I know, guys, when's the last time you saw me upload that much, right? We haven't had a chance to talk about what happened to players like Medvedev, Tsitsipas, and the rest of the 90s generation. Their exits weren't just upsets. They might be telling us something much bigger about where tennis is headed. Or maybe I'm just being dramatic and they'll prove me wrong in the coming weeks. But before we dive into what happened in Melbourne, let's look at what happened last week, starting with Felix Auger-Aliassime, who just reminded everyone why one tough loss doesn't define your season. Felix's title run in Montpellier was a nice little rebound from his disappointing Australian Open. And what better place to find his mojo than in his favorite setting, the indoor hardcourt. Felix entered the tournament as the number 2 seed and went through Arthur Cazaux, Bu, and Jesper de Jong without dropping a set en route to the final. In the final, he survived a 3-set thriller against an impressive Alexander Kovacevic for his second title of the season and the 7th of his career. The final against Kovacevic was a stiff test for Felix because he blew 2 championship points in the second set tiebreak and looked a bit short of confidence at some point in the third set. However, he was able to hold firm in the third set tiebreak. Having gone from not winning a title since 2023 to winning 2 titles in the span of 5 weeks, the win will no doubt be reassuring for the Canadian. With his deadly serve and forehand combo, Felix played unbelievable first-strike tennis all tournament. His average first-serve win percentage for the tournament was 80.5%, and even his significantly weaker second serve had a win percentage that fell just short of the 70% mark. Felix hit double figures in aces in every single match, and his forehand was producing lots of damage, which only reminds you of how the Canadian's tennis is perfectly suited for fast indoor hard courts. I know we've asked this question a number of times over the last 2 or 3 seasons, but is this finally the year where Felix hits another purple patch outside of indoor hard courts? He reached the final in Madrid last year and was a set away from the title. Who says he doesn't have any more of those runs in him? Maybe a Masters 1000 this season? Anyway, shout out to Alexander Kovacevic for an incredible tournament. Despite being ranked outside the top 100 before the tournament, Kovacevic played like a top 30 player for a large chunk of the time, making it through qualies and knocking out multiple seeds. I have to admit that I was blown away with what I saw. He's a very sound player technically, and his one-handed backhand is a thing of beauty, something I could watch all day. I was especially impressed by the acute angles and the pace the American was able to work with off the backhand as well. Kovacevic lost in the second round of qualifying at the Australian Open before reeling off 5 wins in a row to win the Hueras Indoor Challenger, meaning that he entered Montpellier with some confidence and form to work with. Kovacevic took down Bublik in the quarterfinal before beating Rublev in the semis for his first top 10 win. In that match, Rublev struggled to deal with the pace and baseline variability of Kovacevic as he broke the Russian in the final game of both sets. It's not the kind of response to an early exit in Melbourne that Rublev would have been hoping for, but more on that later on in the video. It was a maiden tour-level final for Kovacevic, and although he fell just short of his title aspirations, he'll be content with a top 75 presence once again. The real treat, however, came at the Davis Cup first round of qualifying, where players were not just breaking the glass ceiling, but also breaking bad. Tensions boiled over as Arthur Fils took down Brazil's Thiago Seyboth Wild in straight sets. It started off with Fils serving Thiago a breadstick in the first set. Fast forward to the second set, and the scores were level at 4-all. With breakpoint for Fils, the Frenchman hit a shot right at Seyboth Wild, with the Brazilian at the net.
Well.
The umpire ruled that Thiago's racket touched the ball and awarded the point to Fils. Thiago then went over to plead with Fils to tell the umpire the truth, that the ball didn't hit his racket. Now, Fils, on his part, didn't bat an eye. After yet another contentious point, Fils closed out the match 6-1, 6-4, but all hell broke loose at the net exchange. Fils tried to embrace and put his arm around Thiago, but the Brazilian shunned him, and then things got a little spicy. Now also pissed off, Fils also wanted to pass across a message to Seyboth Wild. From what I saw, the margins were slim, and without watching the replays, it would have been difficult to say whether or not the ball hit Thiago's racket. With fans choosing sides, some criticizing Fis's actions, and others supporting the Frenchman, it all seemed like misdirected energy in some way. These things will keep happening until tennis decides to put technology to greater use during match play. Nonetheless, the Fils-Thiago drama was nothing compared to what we saw from Garan and Zizou Bears. And it just so happened to be that the umpire involved was none other than Carlos Ramos, an umpire who has unfortunately found himself in the spotlight in the past. During the playoff tie between Belgium and Chile, Zizou Bears took on Cristian Garin, and this happened. Why was Bergs celebrating wildly, you may ask? Well, he had broken Garan and was going to serve for the match to also help Belgium clinch the tie and get past Chile. Clearly, it meant a lot to Bergs and his team. Still, it doesn't change the fact that it was way too reckless and probably stupid for Zizou to barge into Garan during the changeover. Now, here's the thing. Bergs most likely didn't mean any harm to Garan. I mean, who breaks a player, has a chance to serve for the match, and then decides right there that they'll risk getting defaulted by pulling out a WWE move from their pocket? Doesn't make sense, right? It definitely wasn't the intention, and Bergs was carried away by all the adrenaline and heat of the occasion. But should he have been defaulted? Garan and his team wanted a default win, and despite receiving medical treatment, Garan refused to play for over 10 minutes and was punished for multiple time violations, effectively giving Belgium the W. Garan shared an image to social media of his eye post-match. Chile's team doctor also said that Garan suffered from eye inflammation, dizziness, and was struggling to see properly. Some fans think Garan made the most of the situation and just wanted to cop out because he was already losing. While a default for Bergs would have been quite harsh, it would have been hard to argue against just going by the rules. Not to mention that we've seen players defaulted for way less egregious acts in the past. In most of those cases, the intent didn't matter, the responsibility was solely on the party who made the unnecessary physical contact in the first place, and it didn't matter whether the person at the opposite side of the net made the most of the situation or not. The Chilean Tennis Federation is looking at a possible appeal against the umpire's decision. Ramos has also since come out to explain the situation, and here's what he said.
I consider it was a very unfortunate accident, caused unfortunately by a player without any intention.
But let me know in the comments, should Bergs have been defaulted? Guys, if you're looking to keep up with all the latest happenings from around the ATP and WTA tours, then you'll definitely want to subscribe to our newsletter, the Courtside Digest. It's the spot for news and opinions, and we're sending it out every week. So if you're looking to keep an eye out on what's going on around the tours, definitely subscribe. I'll leave the link in the description for you down below. Because I was working on so many video ideas last week, I couldn't cover some of the biggest losers at the Australian Open, so I decided to dedicate a small section of this video to that. Tsitsipas, Medvedev, and Rublev all saw early exits, and once again, it reminded us about the shortcomings of the 90s generation. Here's a graph showing every Grand Slam won since the turn of the century. Notice this huge gap here? The players born in the 90s were suppressed by those born in the 80s, and now the next-gen players born in the 2000s have overtaken them. The worst part is that the trend doesn't seem like it's bucking anytime soon. It goes without saying that without major improvements to their respective games, the 90s generation just won't have too many opportunities to win slams. For Rublev, he'll need to work more on his first serve return, pace absorption, and soft touch. I saw him doing some drop shots and slices at Montpellier, and it felt like a bit of a breath of fresh air. Switching focus to Medvedev, he needs to up the ante more than anyone else. Daniil turns 29 soon, and you know what that means. The older you get, the more difficult it gets to work on certain things for the most part. Medvedev has just ended his partnership with Gilles Simon as things didn't exactly work out the way they wanted. Now, he's still working with Gilles Savara. In my opinion, Medvedev might want to explore additional coaching options with the focus on getting his serve back to where it was and making his first strike tennis more deadly than ever. Medvedev has also re-echoed Tsitsipas' thoughts on things being different in terms of motivation now that he's in his late 20s. He says, quote, "When you're 20 years old and you first come on tour, you have a lot of fire and you just go for it. You're fearless. When you're 28, nearly 29, it's a bit different. The fire still burns in me, but it's a different fire. You need to try to keep the fire going as the margins are so small, and I have it." End quote. What about Taylor Fritz though? He's one of the most improved players in the last 52 weeks, and he's clearly on the right path. In my opinion, his early exit at the Australian Open seemed like an anomaly. Things haven't quite gone to plan for Hurkacz since his injury last year. But with Nicolas Massu and Ivan Lendl in his corner, I reckon they'll be looking to retool his forehand and return especially. Even when Hurkacz was playing lights-out tennis, his return was still by far the worst among the elite players, and you only need to see his percentage of return points won in the last 5 seasons or so. Almost always below the tour average. If you keep holding serve but can't break your opponent, you get to play way too many tiebreaks, and it won't always go your way. Take a look at the top 3 players with the most tiebreaks per set. What do Perricard, Hurkacz, and Shelton all have in common? Huge serves and what? Average returns at best. To further make this point, let's also look at the percentage of return points won in the last 52 weeks. Perricard has the lowest percentage of return points won in the top 50, and just ahead of him is Shelton. Look a few spots higher, and you'll find Hurkacz. For Francis Tiafoe and Seb Korda, I think it's the mindset that needs to change. Korda's case has been particularly puzzling to me, so much so that I considered doing a deep dive on him. He has all the tools, a 6-foot, 5-inch frame, a serve that could be overpowering, including a hard slice delivery, flexible and technically sound ground strokes, and good variety too. However, it seems to me that he's been a bit too conservative with his approach, and it's almost like he's not making the most of what he has. I'll admit, Korda's been unlucky with injuries, so that's also a factor. But it's getting to that point where after every Korda loss in a major, you see comments like this. Next up, we have Grigor Dimitrov, who injured his adductor muscle in the first round. Things aren't looking good from a physical standpoint, and when it so happens to be the case, nothing else matters. The immediate goal would simply be to be fit enough to play at least 5 matches in a row without having to struggle physically. And finally, we have Casper Ruud. It appears that we might have to wait until the clay season to see the very best of him again. This doesn't mean that he can't play at a high level on hard courts, but at this point, I'm just not expecting it. His strengths, the heavy topspin forehand in particular, are just more suited to clay. At the moment, Casper Ruud is already in his cowboy era ahead of the Dallas Open, and I wonder what he's got cooking. For those expecting Wimbledon to switch to a 15-day event like the other slams, well, it's not gonna happen. In other words, Wimbledon will be the only Grand Slam that will remain a 14-day event because of how difficult it is to maintain the grass for an extra day. According to the existing data, Wimbledon's center court can only manage 80 hours of tennis. That's like the maximum, so yeah, we aren't going to get that extra day. Over on the WTA side of things, there was no shortage of drama at the 2 tournaments in Linz and Singapore. Ekaterina Alexandrova won the biggest title of her career after beating Diana Yastremska in 3 sets in the final. Alexandrova was serving impeccably in that match and had won 9 of the first 11 games. At 6-2, 3-love, you would have thought the match was a foregone conclusion. Well, until Diana Yastremska upped her level and came back to take 9 games in a row.
Oh, that's the best of the lot.
It was the full WTA experience, and Alexandrova was feeling the heat, having lost her previous 2 Linz finals. However, she was able to keep her composure in the tight moments, and this time, despite wasting a couple of championship points, she got the job done in the end.
And Alexandrova finally finds herself top of the podium in Linz.
Yastremska would have been proud of her performance and the fact that she's gained some ground in the rankings. After failing to defend her semi-final points from last year's Australian Open, the Ukrainian fell nearly 40 spots off and was ranked at number 72, but now she sees a return to the top 50. Jetting off to Singapore, we saw Elise Mertens secure her 9th career title in style, brushing off the resurgent An Lee in the final in straights. A former top 15 player, Mertens is now 10-2 on the year, and she'll be looking to maintain that form going into the Middle East swing. In the week earlier, we saw exits for Karolina Muchova, Maria Sakkari, Jasmine Paolini, Zheng Qinwen, and Jessica Pegula. The top 5 players aren't in action this week, so we won't get to see the likes of Pegula and Paolini. Paolini is the defending champion in Dubai, so there are plenty of points on the line, and she'll be looking to stay fresh ahead of the 2 upcoming WTA 1000 tournaments. For Muchova and Sakkari, they'll be looking to build on their form after reaching the semis and the quarterfinals respectively in Linz. We were looking forward to a possible return for Naomi Osaka in Abu Dhabi, but she's since withdrawn and she's still dealing with the abdominal injury that forced her to retire from her 3rd round match in Melbourne. Hopefully, she stays healthy for the rest of the season. Elsewhere, Elena Rybakina's coaching roller coaster continued amid Stefano Vukov's provisional suspension. The defending champ in Abu Dhabi has now hired former world number 42 Davide Sanguinetti as her new coach. Now it's worth noting, even though Vukov isn't allowed to join Rybakina at tournaments, Rybakina claims that Vukov and Sanguinetti are always in touch. On a brighter note, two-time Wimbledon champion Petra Kvitova announced that she'll be making her return to the WTA Tour this month at the ATX Open.
After 15 months being away from tennis, I'm coming back to tennis circuit.
Guys, we have lots of tennis going on for the rest of the week. The ATP playing field is stacked in Rotterdam, and a couple of big names are also in Dallas. Over on the WTA, we have two tournaments taking place in Abu Dhabi and Cluj-Napoca. You can keep up with all the action by smashing that subscribe button, and if you want me to cover any players or topics, be sure to let me know in the comments.